Hey kids and those watching, welcome to our next part in Encounters with the Risen Jesus. Today we are going to check out how Jesus appeared after his resurrection to a large number of people. Do you already know how many? If not, take a guess at the number. Now, hold on to that answer to see how close you are. Now, there is only one place in the Bible that we can find this answer. And it is a really interesting passage. The passage contains a special creed that was taught to Paul and many other Christians who then taught many others. Well, what's a creed? It's a short saying or like a poem that doesn't necessarily rhyme. Creeds are meant to be memorized and passed along easily. What makes this creed so special? Well, I'm glad you asked. Well, the first reason this creed is so special is what it teaches. It is a fantastic creed that tells the gospel in a short, powerful way. Remember, the gospel is the good news of Jesus Christ, which is the only truth that can make a person right with God and save a person from sin and judgment. Yes, it is that important. The other reason this is so important is how old it is. Or to look at it another way, how soon it was made. This creed was made and passed on to Paul no more than 5 years after Jesus died and resurrected. And I really think for some other reasons, it happened within a matter of months probably from the events that it talks about, Jesus' death and resurrection. So this proves very well that the information in this creed was not a legend. What do I mean? Well, a legend is a story that over time begins to have parts that are exaggerated or stretched, made bigger than what really happened. Or it adds parts that are made up, or imagined or dreamed about. So things that aren't really true are added to the story to make it a legend in order to make the story more interesting or amazing and to get people to have more fun with it or pay more attention to it, right? Or believe it maybe, and follow it. So the farther the story is made from the time it actually happened, the more likely the story will become a legend instead of the true story with just the facts. It is kind of like a fishtail. No, not that fishtail. I mean a fishtail as in a story, a tale that is a story, right? A big fish story. Have you ever heard of those before? So let me give an example. You see, when Bob here and I went fishing down by the lake, honey, we didn't catch a whole lot. But right before we left, I did bring in the biggest catch of the day, a brown trout, about that big. He put up a decent fight. Oh yeah, kids, your Uncle Bob and I were quite the fishermen in our day. One day, we were on a one-of-a-kind lake where only the best are allowed to fish, like your Uncle Bob and I, and we were catching quite a few good-sized ones. Then, as the sun started setting and the clouds started moving in, it began to get dark. A yank on the line startled me. Oh, this was a big one. That one fought and fought. By the time I reeled in that huge, beautiful rainbow trout, it was definitely dark. But I tell you what, that rainbow trout was worth it. About this big. There I was with your great Uncle Bob, out on our faithful ship, the Renegade, catching fish left and right like nobody's business, out on that most magnificent lake in the United States of America. The clouds began to move in fast. A dreadful storm was a brewing. coming in like a fury. When all of a sudden, me line jumped and knocked me over. Luckily, I held on and got ready for the fight of the century. Oh, that fish was fierce, so I knew she was a giant one. As the lightning struck all around us and the thunder boomed, I finally tasted the thrill of victory, and me, shipmate, and I dragged her into our mighty vessel. That dragon trout was as big, so big only 2 men could hold her. Grandpa, isn't that the picture behind you on the wall? Well, so it is. Well, my friends, kids, that became a legend. Until the picture put the story back to the way it belonged. Now, that picture was taken right after the real catch. And that is the same way this creed works. It was made so soon after the actual story happened. And it was so simple to learn and to pass on that not only was it not a legend itself, but it also kept legends from taking over the real story of Jesus' death, resurrection, and how he appeared to people. So we see this when Paul writes this creed in a letter about 20 years later to a church in Corinth. Remember, the creed was made much sooner, but it kept getting passed on. And here he puts it in a letter 20 years later. Let's read about it. Let's read it. So here it is, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We'll begin in verse 3. Paul says, "For I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received." So you see, Paul gave the church at Corinth, when he first preached to the people at Corinth, he told them this creed. And then this was the same creed that he says that I'd received. Again, probably very shortly after he saw Jesus on the road to Damascus, which was about 2 years after Jesus died and rose. It might have been up to 3 years after he saw it when he went to go see Peter and James, but I think it was sooner. And I think that's why he, in part, went to Peter and James to investigate what was going on. So here it is. He preached to the church in Corinth, and now he's writing back to that church, and he's reminding them, hey, remember this creed that I gave you? And now he writes it down. Here it is. How that Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the scriptures. Now, that's the gospel story in a nutshell. Jesus died for our sins, just like the Bible said he would. He was buried, which proved he had died, and he rose again the third day according to the scriptures, just like the prophets had said he would. And how did we know? Where's the proof in this creed that Jesus not only died, he was buried, and that he rose again? Well, it's that he appeared to people. So let's read on with this creed. It goes on. Verse 5, it says, "And that he was seen of Cephas." That's the Aramaic name for Peter. "Then of the 12." Remember the 12 disciples. We saw how he appeared to them. Verse 6, "After that, he was seen of above 500 brethren at once." There's your number. Over 500 people at one time. That's what we're talking about today. Now, listen what he says about them. Now, that's part of the creed, and he gives a little side note. He says, "Of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep." In other words, many of those 500 people, over 500 people, are still alive when Paul wrote this 20 years later. But some had passed away to go be with the Lord. Now, verse 7, he finishes it up with this verse. Here's the rest of the creed. "After that, he was seen of James." That's talking about the brother of Jesus, by the way, the half-brother of Jesus. And then he finishes, "Then of all the apostles." Now, I think through verse 7 that we read, that's the creed. And then Paul continues on. He adds what also happened to him after Jesus had already ascended, and Paul was actually had become a persecutor of the Christians. Remember, Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus in more of a vision, but it was the resurrected Christ, even though it was more of a vision that some of the people didn't notice. It wasn't quite the same. But here it is, verse 8. And last of all, he was seen of me also, as of one born out of due time. So he adds his own testimony to it after the creed. He says, by the way, I also got to see the resurrected Jesus, just to show that, hey, Jesus really did rise from the dead. He was alive. He's alive forevermore, and he appeared to prove it. So, did you catch it? No, not did you catch the fish. Did you catch the big number of people that Jesus appeared to at one time? That's right, I did point it out already, didn't I? So what was it? Yes, over 500 brethren at one time. I know it says brethren, which means brothers and sisters. No, this is not a family reunion. Jesus had brothers and sisters, but not 500. Have you ever been to a family reunion? Those can be nice, where you get together with all your relatives and have like a barbecue or a big picnic. I've heard of some big family reunions where the family even wear t-shirts with the family name on the back. Now, Miss Shanice and I have our 7 kids, with our 8th coming soon, God willing. And look forward to meeting that baby girl pretty soon. I'm getting pretty excited about it. But let me think here. If we have 8 children, how many children would they have to have, or would they have to have, for us to have a family reunion of 500 or over 500? Okay, so our kids would each need to have 8 kids. Then their kids would need to have 8 kids each also. Wow, now that sounds legendary, right? By the way, this orange hoodie of mine has my family name on the back, ready for a reunion, although I don't expect over 500. So look, see it? You see it? Hey, why you laughing? Okay, who's the prankster around here? So, when it says brethren, it means brothers and sisters who were fellow believers and followers of Jesus. That is, brothers and sisters in the family of God. I imagine that after Jesus met with the 7 in Galilee, remember, he told Peter, feed my sheep, that perhaps the disciples, with Peter probably leading the way, put together like a reunion to tell other followers how Jesus had risen from the dead. Perhaps that's what happened. Perhaps, it doesn't say exactly what happened, but perhaps Peter said, hey, I'm going to feed Jesus' sheep. I'm going to go find the followers, gather them together to let them know that Jesus is risen. I'm going to start getting back to fishing for men, right? To feeding the sheep rather than going out fishing on the Sea of Galilee. So guess what happens when this meeting place happens, this reunion? Well, Jesus shows up and appears to that big group himself. What a neat thing to see happen. And so Jesus, I want to point out that Jesus is being reliable here. I don't think Jesus even told them that he was going to show up and do that. Peter was doing his part, and Jesus, he can always be depended on, always be trusted, and here he shows up to these people as well. You know what? The fact that he appeared to over 500 people at once is also important to those who like to try to argue against the resurrection and against appearances, because it takes away people's argument that the disciples were just seeing things or hallucinating, or that they're just making it up. In fact, Paul points out that when he wrote this letter 20 years later, most of those believers were actually still alive, still telling the true story, not a legend, the true story based on this creed that was made right after, just like that picture of the guy who caught the fish, right? He's telling the best story. And it's the only story that saves those who turn their heart from sin and believe in it. Let's read it again. How that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the 3rd day according to the scriptures, and that he was seen of Cephas, then of the 12. After that, he was seen above 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep. After that, he was seen of James, then of all the apostles. Wow. We should not only believe this amazing creed, but we should memorize it and be ready to share it. By the way, you should just go ahead and add on verse 8 that Paul added on in his comment about how those people were still alive until the day he wrote it, most of them. This shows us just how reliable Jesus is. Remember, he can be depended on. He can be trusted. He's the real deal. We can trust and depend on him. So let us do just that. Memorize, learn, share this creed, and God bless you.